So let me pray for us, and then we'll kind of jump in. So what today is it's just an overview. So we're going to go over the basics of all 9 numbers, the basics of the Enneagram, and hopefully bring some clarity to some of the terminology around it, and give you some thoughts. We're not going to get into how do you engage your specific number. We wouldn't have time to do all that. That's a better either afterwards conversation or a one-on-one sit-down kind of thing where we can start to explore what health and balance looks like. And we'll get into why that's valuable and important. But all this really is just going to be walking through the Enneagram. So let me pray for us, and then I'll finish some thoughts. Jesus, thank you for today, Lord. Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for just this desire in us to grow and to be more aware of who we are, more aware of who you are, that we would live whole lives. You've designed us to be free in you and to live holistically, and not that the Enneagram is some miracle cure, but it does help reveal some of these things inside of us. And so, Lord, we pray that you would use this time to teach us about ourselves, to teach us about you, Lord, and that ultimately that through this, the good news would become better to us, that we would experience your grace and your mercy in new and profound ways, and that you would move in and through us, Lord, by your Spirit. So we thank you for this time. Pray you would go before us, lead us through it in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, so where's my little remote? There it is. So a couple things just to kind of set up. So because there are Christian groups out there and Christians out there who would be like, oh, it's evil. It looks like a pentagram, right? Enneagram's dangerous, or it's pop psychology. It's actually folk psychology, not pop psychology. But a couple things just to think about. John Calvin, at the beginning of his Institute, says this: true and solid wisdom consist almost entirely of 2 parts, the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. The church has been good, and the modern church has done a really good job, quote unquote, of teaching us about God and about having us invest ourselves in spirituality. The church has not done a very good job of helping us invest in knowing ourselves and understanding our nature, how our formation has shaped us, the way we see the world. That's just something the church hasn't invested a ton of time into. And so because of that, there's a gap. You can have the Pharisees had a ton of theological knowledge and no self-awareness. And that was a big problem. And so for us, it's kind of a similar situation, right? We get into this thing where we can become very spiritually minded and miss the realities of what's going on inside of us because we just kind of skip over it, and we've never been trained, or there's no necessarily we haven't been given tools to equip us to help us to do that. Because human beings are designed extremely complex. If you didn't know that already, you are a very complex being. You are a bag of mixed motivations. And so the better you learn to discern those, the better you can be at being able to understand yourself, understand your propensities for sin, the lies that you believe, so on and so forth, and then begin to speak truth to those. So the Enneagram is a tool in this. It is not the gospel. It will never be the gospel. It does not replace the gospel. But it is a tool to help us understand ourselves better. 1 Timothy 4:16, Paul's talking to this young pastor, and he says this, he says, watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. So notice he talks about life and doctrine. And again, we're good at talking about doctrine. We're good at trying to be doctrinally pure. We're not necessarily good at being aware of ourselves and aware of how we are received by people and how our challenges, struggles, sin, and brokenness can make an impact on the world around us negatively, right? So that's just to kind of give you an idea of how I feel like this. There's a value in this within the context of a Christian community. You and I are designed for and defined by relationships. And you can break that really into 3 categories. A relationship with God, right? So you're designed for a relationship with God. You're also designed for a relationship with yourself. So whether you realize it or not, you have a relationship with yourself. You have a view of yourself. You have a way that you talk to yourself, a perception of who you are and what your purpose is. And you're also designed for relationships with others. And so the reality is, though, that sin has fractured and created dysfunction in all 3 of those relationships. That's what sin has done. It has corrupted and corroded the wholeness that God designed us for in all 3 of those relational environments, right? And so what the reality is that we are made up of a mix of nature and nurture. So nature is the idea that you were born in the image of God, uniquely designed by him, gifted by him, delighted by in him, And he designed you for good works, things that he's already laid out before you, right? And there's uniqueness, like, McMurray family, how many kids are there? 8. None of you guys the same, right? None of you guys the same. In fact, all 3 of you different numbers, right? Same mom, same dad, same household environment, right? And so God designs us uniquely, right? And so there's a sense that our nature is that we are designed specifically and purposefully by God uniquely, and that sin has co-opted those good gifts that God has given us. And what it causes is one of 2 things. Usually it causes either an under-reliance on those gifts, so an under-reliance on God, or an over-reliance. Like we take gifts and passions that God has given us and we make them idols, right? So we can over-rely or under-rely on those kinds of things. And then, so basically what we do is we make good things ultimate things, right? So we take good gifts of God and we make them ultimate, we make them the most important thing. So there's a sense that in our nature we do that. In our nurturing, though, is the idea of how we experience relational formation. From the earliest ages, neuroscientists have done tons of research on this, and they're saying that within the first 15 months, around the 15-month mark, a baby is already making very specific subconscious decisions about how it will do relationships based on its attachment with its primary caregivers. It's called attachment theory. And so from your very earliest formation, you were already making decisions based on the type of primary caregivers you had, their weaknesses, their strengths, their availability, all that stuff. That was already forming in you early on, and it nurtures the person you become, right? And so it causes that formation to develop. In that formation, what we end up doing is we develop defense mechanisms. So we create false and true selves, right? Or false selves to protect ourselves. So like for me, I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, so 8s get big and loud in order to protect. It's a protective measure. And those things that you've developed as a person, some of us withdraw or hide, right? And so it's another form of protection. It's the same, it's a different mechanism for the same issue. And so we all have developed these things and do it almost all subconsciously, unaware that we're doing these things. And these things have developed, but as they develop, they develop deep roots in us. And the things that work to protect you when you were 5 and 6 likely are hindering you from meaningful relationships and depth of relationship when you get into your 20s, 30s, and 40s. And so that's part of what we're hoping that the Enneagram helps us with, is understanding both nature and nurture and how those two come together to develop you, to make who you are here and now. The way that the nurturing is like the wounds that you carry, they shape how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see the world, right? And then those protective measures. Along with that, we also have strongholds and patterns and perceptions that we're fighting. So every one of us has false narratives in our mind and our heart, how we perceive the world and the people around us. You have a narrative in your head. People are inherently unsafe. That's a narrative. So I can't trust them. So you start from a place of distrust, not a place of trust, right? Or I can't trust myself ever, right? So we all have narratives that we believe. The world is unsafe. The world is no one could love me unless I fill in your blank, right? So these are all these narratives that we carry. We also have false beliefs about who God is, who we are, the nature of the relationships around us, what the gospel is. So none of us have all of that figured out. So we all have these false narratives and false beliefs that filter into all of this. We have false identities, like I talked about, like who we believe we are intrinsically and extrinsically. So intrinsically is the value that you have as just a human being living on earth, extrinsic value, the value that God has placed upon you, the value that other people place upon you. We have beliefs about these things, and they are absolutely impacting everything you do all the time, and you have oftentimes no idea they're doing it. You just know you react a certain way, right? We have false identities. And then we have false and unhealthy behaviors. Now, when you get into false and unhealthy behaviors, those are the most obvious things, right? We're like, oh, I do this, and that's not okay, and so that's obvious. So we're able to recognize oftentimes the false and negative behaviors. The challenge is those are symptoms. They're not the root cause. Behaviors are symptomatic of deeper issues. And so oftentimes what we do is we end up treating symptoms. So it's like playing that game whack-a-mole, right? Like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore, and so I'm going to hit that. Oh, I need to drink less, so I'm going to do this. Or, hey, I need to go do, and so we chase symptoms, but we never actually start getting under the surface of why, what's the false beliefs, what's the false narratives, what are the things that are going on inside of me that are propelling me or compelling me in these areas. It's one of the things that I think Enneagram helps with a lot. So what happens is we have all of this kind of relational disconnect inside of us. And it shapes three things, and these are the three things that I want to focus in on when we talk about the Enneagram. So this is the Enneagram, right? 9 numbers, and they're all interconnected, and we'll talk more about the fact that we have access to all 9 numbers, and it's not a box to put yourself in, but the 3 things that really Enneagram helps us with is, 1, how we perceive the world. So how do you see the world? What's the lens through which you see the world around you? The narratives that you believe about yourself, about others, about the world, about God, about the gospel, right? There's a perception that you have. Have you ever even remotely thought that through, consciously? Or do you just kind of just keep going, right? So how we perceive the world, how we process the world. So in light of my perception now, I process that information and then I present myself, right? We all have false selves. We all have versions of our true self that we present as protective measures. So how you perceive, how you process, and how you present yourself to the world. This is what Enneagram starts to peel back. This is why when you find out your number, and Katie, I heard a little bit of your story, when you find out your number, you can kind of go through a little bit of an existential crisis. Like, ooh, I don't want to be that. I don't like that guy at all, right? That's a good sign that you found your number. If you like your number, it's probably not your core number. But there's a sense that it feels very invasive. When you start to understand it and you start to read it, it kind of feels like you've had some layers peeled back. You're like, ooh, and we naturally will gravitate to the negative side of our number first. Everyone does. Very few people go to the positive side and go, wow, look at all these things I'm amazing at. Everyone goes, that guy's a dork. I don't want to have anything to do with him or her, right? And so that's part of it. That's why, because it's starting to peel back some of these things that are just so instinctive inside of us, but that we don't realize are having significant impact on our life. So that's the 3 things. So as you think this through, as we talk about your number, as you kind of discern your number, how many have taken a test or would say they know their number? Okay, so yeah, I know you haven't. I know you haven't. So pretty much everyone else has, right? And we'll get there. I'm not going to talk about it yet. So what is the Enneagram? Well, the Enneagram is pretty abstract as far as understanding all the total where it came from, but it is a tool. It's an ancient tool. It's been around for a long time. It didn't kind of start bleeding itself into the mainstream until the 60s, into the early 70s. There was a Jesuit priest in Chile, or a community of Jesuits in Chile that started using it. But they were very protective of it. In fact, most of the Jesuits still are very protective of it, the ones that use it, in the sense that it was only to be used in a mentor-mentee relationship. They actually they made people commit to not taking it out of the community. It got taken out of the community of Chile, came back to the US, started getting used in local churches by priests and pastors. The big catalyst, it started kind of filtering through, and then Richard Rohr, who's a Catholic priest, wrote a book, or started teaching it, and then wrote a book. A lot of the modern guys that we look at and talk to and listen to, the books we read, guys like Ian Morgan Cron and some of the other, Beatrice Chestnut, they were, in essence, students of Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr is in his 80s, lives in New Mexico, is a priest there. But that really was kind of like, Rohr was the one that kind of unintentionally brought it into the mainstream because other people had already kind of brought it in. So there's a lot of incarnations of it. If you go back far enough, it wasn't really, what you see today is a more organized version of it than if you were to look back at some of the ancient models of it. But it helps us, it is an ancient tool of self-clarity and self-awareness. Notice the 3 words, self-discovery, self-clarity, and self-awareness. Notice what I'm saying there. Self-discovery, self-awareness, and self-clarity. It is not about typing other people, okay? You are not allowed to type other people. That is not okay. In fact, when the Jesuits would use it in Chile, they actually would say, like, a Jesuit priest would never give his number out to anyone. So basically what they would do is they would start counseling their student. They would not tell their student their number. They would just discern it through the tests that they took. And then they would start teaching them based on what the mentee or the mentor would know. Never explain them the Enneagram or anything, but just use it as a tool to help disciple that person. At the end of that discipleship process, they would tell them their number. And it was something that person who had been trained up in it would hold to and protect. Because again, it's invasive, right? And so it is yours. You get to choose what you do with your story. No one else gets to choose that for you. And so typing other people can be funny when it's like, John the Baptist was an 8, right? I don't think he cares what we think about what he was. But here's the thing, information is power. The more you understand about someone, you can use that information for good or for bad, right? And so knowing other people is good. Knowing your spouse is good. Understanding your spouse's number and how they think and how they act and how you can better support them and love them and care for them, that's all really good. But it has to be something that they invite you into. You don't get to just go, oh, because he's this, that's why he acts that way, right? And so discipline yourself with this. I think it's actually really important to make it a discipline to protect the people around you. Now, does that mean you're going to see someone that you work with and be like, I think he's a 4? Just don't make them a shirt that says you're a 4. And don't be like, oh, you do that because you're a 4. Lean into it. See if that helps. Do things, read up on 4s and go, I bet if I encouraged him this way, that might be cool, right? Without verbalizing it, but just see if it's a tool that helps connect in the relationship, helps that person flourish. It's not about you knowing other people, it's about seeing other people flourish, right? Gospel is about loving our neighbors ourselves. And so it's really important that we do that. And so through the Enneagram, we get insights into who we are by exposing a lot of these relational vulnerabilities we have and shining a light on our relational gifts. So we want to expose the things that are broken and false in our identities, and we want to shine the light on the things that are good and given by God that he has designed us for, right? We want both. And that's one of the things Enneagram helps us do. And again, like I said, it helps us explore how we perceive, process, and present ourselves to the world. And it gives us the tools to expose our false selves and work towards wholeness. You weren't I'll just go through all the rules, okay? Here's the rules of the Enneagram. 1, it's not a box to put yourself in. So every human being has access to all 9 numbers, and we'll talk about to what degree and how much influence they have. But just because your highest score is a 5 doesn't mean that you are now defined as a 5 in the sense that like, oh, this is all I'll ever be. This is who I am, right? It's a tool. It does not box you in. It is a tool of discovery. You utilize it to help understand better. But it's not a box to put yourself in, or anyone else for that matter. So you'll have a primary number, you'll have dominant numbers, numbers that have dominant influence in you, moderate numbers that have moderate influence, and numbers that are less significant or insignificant. But all 9 numbers are all accessible to us. 2, it's not static. The views we were talking about beforehand, Terry and I were, your core number likely will not change. Unless some people are really high in a couple numbers and you can kind of vacillate a little bit. But for the most number, when you settle on whatever your core number comes out as, that's inherent to who you are in many ways. But how resourceful you are in your wing, how you access some of the other numbers under stress and security, which we'll explain all that in a few minutes, all of that stuff's fluid. So like we were joking, because like I tested, the first time I tested was like 3 years ago, give or take. Man, my non-resourceful score's really high, which means I really like the bad side of those numbers. But that doesn't mean that that's always going to be that way. It means that I have a proclivity towards the negative side of those numbers under stress and security. It doesn't mean that's where I'm going to be forever. And so as we understand that, and as we work towards, okay, wow, that's a red flag. When I'm stressed and I start acting this way, that's me going to non-resourceful. As I'm aware of that and I begin to learn to confess and repent and walk in accountability, my score will shift. I guarantee you walk through this stuff faithfully for a year or 2 years, you retake the test, your resourceful score will change. It'll shift a little bit. It may not shift from 12 to 110, but it'll shift because that's part of growing and maturing, right? It's not a box that you put yourself in. That's one of the things I like about Enneagram over other testing models and other things. A lot of the other ones are designed really to box you, and they do good things. Like Myers-Briggs is really good. DISC, I'm not a huge fan of, but But it becomes more of like, this is the box you fit into versus, hey, this is a tool to help you discover more about yourself. Your number is never an excuse for your behavior and choices. So you're like, well, I'm just a 5. I always withdraw. Yeah, no, you don't get to use that excuse. If you need to be engaged, then you need to suck it up and be engaged. That's coming from an 8, who's going to always tell you to suck it up and get engaged, right? So it's not an excuse for bad behavior. It's never an excuse for you to do the things you're not supposed to do or that you know would be unhealthy for you or unhealthy for others. It's not a cure-all and a quick fix, but a diagnostic tool of understanding. And like I said a few minutes ago, it exposes you, and that means you get the choice of what to share and how to share it with others because it exposes you. It is. And then I'll say this. It's only as helpful as you're willing to lean into it in your journey towards freedom and self-discovery. It's only going to be as helpful as you are willing to be honest with yourself and honest with those who are walking that journey with you. Otherwise, it's just a kind of a fun little toy to play with. But if you really want it to have an impact, again, it's not the gospel. But it is a tool, and you must be willing to look honestly at yourself and let the Spirit expose things and experience God's grace in the midst of all of that. The more walls you keep up, the more you fight, the longer the journey will be and or the less fruitful the journey will be. And just before we go on, just as a kind of a balancing thing, because I was thinking about this morning. So here's just a handful of books that I've been utilizing for Enneagram. You guys can grab and look at them afterwards if you want to. This is a little cool Enneagram primer called the Relational Enneagram. Spiritual rhythms for the Enneagram is really good when you start talking about doing spiritual practices that fit within your number. So different types of breath prayers, meditations, things like that, helpful things for Christians that want to kind of learn how to speak truth into some of the false narratives. That's really good. This is a little simple, like, it's just each number, bare bones, kind of like, oh, I just need to know basics of my number, very more clinically feeling. Road Back to You is probably the most helpful, narratively, because you can read it. This is Ian Morgan Cron's, probably the most popular of all the books, and Suzanne Stable. Suzanne Stable actually lives here in Dallas and does Enneagram workshops, so you can actually get trained under her. You can't now because of COVID-19, but you could if we were not under COVID. These are really good books. Those are all Enneagram books. That in of itself is not spiritual wholeness and health. It's a tool, right? So other books that I would encourage you to look at, if you're on this journey of self-discovery and becoming a more healthy, whole person in your relationship with yourself, in your relationship with God, in your relationship with others, in addition to obviously, it should go without saying, but in the addition of like investing yourself in Scripture, investing yourself in prayer and your relationship with God, like that has to be primary. I get a little nervous that people get really, really excited about Enneagram and things like it, and really don't talk much about the gospel at all. Like that should create tension in us. If we are really excited about things like Enneagram and want to do all the things we can to learn about Enneagram, but we don't read our Bibles and we don't practice following Jesus and we don't do the other things that matter, right? So again, I'm an 8, I'm a challenger, so I'm always gonna throw challenges out there. But books like Why Emotions Matter, a great book. This is John and Tristan Collins. John Collins is one of the guys that started the Bible Project. His wife is a counselor, and they wrote a book about emotions. If you're one of the numbers that struggles to identify and express emotion, like myself, very helpful, that kind of a book. This book called The Relational Soul talks a lot about attachment theory. Richard Plass and James Cofield are counselors. They were pastors, both counselors up in Indiana. They have a counseling center. They work with pastors, especially churches that have had like pastoral breakdowns or churches that are in kind of crisis. They work with that. They do a lot of counseling for pastors. The nice thing about this book is it kind of covers some of the attachment theory stuff. And then kind of how does the gospel speak into those things? So how does the gospel bring life into those areas? And they're actually the ones who wrote this too, this Relational Enneagram book. They're the ones who actually govern the test that if you go through us, the test that I have you take for Enneagram, they're the ones that curate your results and stuff. And so it supports their ministry, and it's a trusted resource. So that's why we use them over other tests. There's a lot of tests out there. I've taken 5 or 6 of them now. As far as simplicity yet clarity, the Wagner one that we take, I think, is the best one. There's one called the IEQ-9. which is far more encompassing, but it's like a 60-page document, and it's like $200. So it gets a little crazy. And then the other book that I would even consider is one called The Bondage Breaker by Neil T. Anderson. And this is really about the reality of spiritual bondages that we have in our lives. So again, you're a holistic being. You're spiritual, you're natural, you're a mind, a body, a soul, a heart, you're all these things. Enneagram in of itself does not solve all your problems. It's a tool. And so I would encourage you, if you really are on this journey of wanting to really discover who you are and begin to walk in the freedom that Christ offers you and really kind of build meaningful connections with other people and meaningful relationships where you don't present a false self and you're not always running and hiding, you're going to have to invest in more than just Enneagram. I'll say that, okay? So let's move on. And now we're just going to get in the nuts and bolts of the Enneagram. So the Enneagram, like I showed you, is, come on, baby, there we go. 9 numbers, right? 9 at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those 9 numbers represent a type, a personality type, I guess you could say. And then each person it discerns and kind of comes up with a primary and then a wing. And then under stress and security, they tend to take on the traits of 2 other numbers. That's these lines that go here. And I'll explain that in a second. So we're going to start with triads. So the interesting thing about the Enneagram is it breaks into 3 triads. So 3 sets of numbers. 3 sets of 3 numbers. There we go. That was it. And so it's fascinating about triads is that in the 1960s, American neuroscientist Paul MacLean formulated what was called the Triune brain theory or model, which is based on the divisions of the human brain into 3 distinct groups. And so your brain, according to his model, is broken into 3, which is the what they call the reptilian or the basal ganglia, which is kind of like your gut-centeredness or your instinct center. That's what they would call your lizard brain. So that's your fight or flight. That's when everything else shuts off and you're like, I got to get out of here, or I'm going to punch him, or I'm frozen, right? So it's part of your basal ganglia, and I forget exactly where it is in your brain, so I'm not going to point to a spot. The second part is your limbic system, which is your emotional brain. It's very complex. It's kind of that what you in here we would call about the heart-centered, kind of the heart-centered, and it's where kind of emotions tend to seem to reside in the human brain. And the third part is your rational brain, or the neocortex, and that is obviously your thinking center. It's where you process information, right? And so science has kind of shown that we basically have, generally, it's more nuanced than this, but generally speaking, there's 3 basic aspects of the brain. And what's been really interesting as I've studied this is that the Enneagram kind of breaks us into those 3 triads. In the sense that you have the 8s, 9s, and 1s fall into what they would call the gut or the instinct center. And so there's a sense that 8s, 9s, and 1s operate instinctively out of their gut. Like there's just like, that's just what I know it's right. I know for me, I'm in the gut triad. So I'm far more ready, fire, aim than I probably should be. There's a sense that I just kind of move on things. Where I just instinctively know. And I haven't necessarily processed out all the information, and I'm not necessarily thinking about the implications in the lives of people. I just kind of know. Their primary emotion for 8s, 9s, and 1 is anger. Now, when you say anger, we all think like screaming and yelling. Anger shows itself a lot of different ways. And what we wouldn't necessarily call anger is oftentimes anger. Impatience is anger. Resentment is a form of anger. And so just because you're in the anger triad and you're like, well, I never scream and yell at people, doesn't mean you ain't angry. Your anger is far more subtle and far more prevailing than you want to believe. So just as a heads up to you. So 2, 3s, and 4s fall into the heart triad, and their primary emotion is shame. So the idea of the heart triad is they tend to make decisions instinctively based on feelings. Or you could say they make it based on the potential impact on others too. So they're far more relationally oriented. So it's like, well, I don't want to do that because it may hurt so-and-so. They pull more from that than say the other 2 thinking centers or instinct centers do, right? So you've got 2, 3s, and 4s fall into the heart triad. Their primary emotion is shame. We'll get more into shame in a few minutes. And then 5s, 6s, and 7s are kind of these are the brainiacs. They're the ones who think. They process cognitively. And so their instinct is in their head. So they're going to be more measured than the other 2. They're going to be more data oriented. Like I want the information. Like I got to fill in the gaps before we can make a decision on this, right? And so if you put one of these with one of those, you get good fireworks, right? Because it's like the one in the gut triad's like, let's go, and the one over here in the head triad's going, whoa, 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 whoa. We need some more information before we move anywhere. So that creates a lot of fun. And their primary emotion for 5, 6s, and 7s is fear. Now, the interesting thing, it shows itself differently. And I wish we had the time. We don't have time to go into all of it. But fear expressed in a 5 or a 6 and fear expressed in a 7 looks very different. It expresses itself totally differently. It's very nuanced. Like I said, we're very complex beings. But so just as you understand triads, that's kind of things. Triads is actually something very interesting in helping discern your number if you're on the fence. It can help you kind of narrow in on what you might be if you're kind of high in a couple different areas, which you can be for sure. So that's triads. By the way, feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point. Just stop me because I'm just going to kind of charge because I want to make sure we're done in a reasonable time frame. But if you have a pressing question, just throw it out and we'll stop and do it, okay? So each number tends to take on the attributes of another number under stress and under security. So like this is an example. So if you're a 3, if you're a primary 3, then under stress, sorry, I typed that wrong. If you're a 3, under stress, you move towards 9. It's a typo. And if you're under security, you move towards 6. Does that make sense? So when I say stress, it doesn't mean like this prevailing sense of doom stress. It just means like I'm on the clock. I got till 2 p.m. to finish this. That's a form of stress, right? There's a sense that there's an external force that's moving you in a direction. There's someone behind you going, come on, right? That's when you define stress in this terms, that's what you're talking about. Now, that could mean stress in the terms of like crisis and all that kind of stuff too, obviously. So it's a sliding scale of stress. But ultimately, if you just want to think about stress, just think in terms of external motivation moving me. Security is no external motivation moving me. I am on my own to move myself, right? So that's for what a secure position would be. And we tend to take on the characteristics of those two. It's pretty crazy when you start to look at it and how they're all interconnected in that. Now within that, so it gets to this where we start to get into some layers and it gets complex. So if I'm a 3, and if you've taken the test, you've seen this, there's a resourceful 3 and a less resourceful 3. So resourcefulness and less resourcefulness. I keep saying non-resourcefulness. That's actually not a good way to say it. It's less resourceful. Because you're not non-resourceful, you're just less resourceful. Huh? Yeah. I instead of like being so thing. So for example, so under stress, a 3 moves towards 9, but they can move to the resourceful side of 9 or the non-resourceful side of 9, right? If a 3 is secure, they can move to the resourceful side of 6 or the non-resourceful side of 6, right? So for example, think of it this way. So if I'm secure, so some people when they feel totally secure, they get lazy, apathetic, shut down, withdrawn, right? So some people go there under security. Some people need stress. They need something external moving them along. And they actually perform better when they have external forces on them. When they have no external forces on them, they're like, cool, I get to do whatever I want. Some people, they're like, hey, don't put any restrictions on me. I'm good. Like I can get it done. 1s are this way. 1s are like, get out of my way. 3s are this way. Get out of my way. I'm an achiever. I can get it done. I can move it down the road, right? So there's a sense that for some numbers, you actually you're almost restrained by having too much external force on you. And so in that, you either go to the high side of it, so when you talk about resourcefulness, I'll just read it. Resourceful is how much of the good gift of your style is operating in your personality. And so on your test, if you've taken it, higher resourceful score equals a greater tendency to appropriate your giftedness wisely. And that goes with your core number as well as with where you go under stress and under security. Does that make sense? Is that everyone kind of still with me? Less resourcefulness is how much you overuse, over-rely, or over-identify with that gift. So it isn't necessarily that it's bad, but what can happen is it can become ultimate, like we were talking about at the beginning, right? So the higher your less resourceful score is, the greater temptation that you are that under those conditions, you will go to the dark side of your number rather than the high side of your number. Does that make sense? So that's when you start to kind of nuance and think it through, you'll start to see these patterns. And again, none of this is like polarized. Like there's nuance. There's days when you're going to go, oh, I went pretty good. And then there's other days where you're like, man, I kind of drifted. But what it does is it gives you the ability to start to see warning lights in your life. So for example, I'm an 8. Under stress, I can go to 5. Now, the high side of 5 is I get really organized and data-oriented, and I'm good at going, okay, what do we need and how do we kind of make this work? The downside is I withdraw from relationships, I shut down. And so it's a great thing when I can go, why did I cancel meetings today? Why do I not want to be, oh, okay, I'm probably not in a healthy space right now. Something's going on. I may not know what's going on, but at least I have an awareness. It's like your oil light in your car coming on going, oh, okay, I need to do some reflection because something's not okay right now. And so that's where this stuff becomes really helpful in self-awareness. On your scores, and I'll do this really briefly. By the way, and the goal in all of this is growing towards balance. So it's not just identifying where you're at, but it's the process of growth, right? So again, you may be under stress. Maybe you're super non-resourceful in your 9 if you're a 3. That doesn't mean you're always going to be that way. It just means that the more aware you are of it, and the more you say, hey, like under stress, I tend to do these things, or I tend to start to believe these things or have these narratives. I need encouragement, whether it's from your spouse, from a good friend, from people in your church, but like, hey, here's ways that you can encourage me because I start to fall into these patterns. I start to withdraw. I start to run and hide, whatever it would be, right? And as you do that, you grow. And as you grow, your resourceful score changes and it balances more. The goal is always balance, a holistic balance of our lives, right? So as far as the scores, when you look at those tests, for those of you who've taken it, like I said, you have all access to all 9 numbers. You're not static. But if you look at that, it's a scale from 0 to 100. Between 0 and 30 will be fairly insignificant impact on your personality. So any of your number scores that are under 30, you're probably not going to access a ton of that, or you're not going to experience a ton of that in your day-to-day operating. Between 31 and 60, you're probably going to experience some influence. So I hear this a lot where it's like for example, let's say someone's a 1, and they're like, yeah, but like I feel like sometimes like what they say about the 5s, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's like, okay, you may have a 5 score that's between 30 and 60 or even higher. That means that number is going to have influence in how you see the world and how you process and present yourself. So so you have a primary, but like there's influence coming from all sides. So between 30 and 60, there's going to be moderate influence. Between 61 and 100 is going to be significant, which means that you're going to pull from all these different areas, like you just do it instinctively, and it impacts how you process, perceive, and present yourself. For example, like Stacy do you mind me saying? Stacy's a 1 with a 2 wing, but she's in the 90% in her 1, her 2, and her 9, which means all 3 of those have significant impact on how she. So for a long time, it was like we thought she was a 2 with maybe a 1 wing. Like we went that route for a long time until you took a test. But then there was like, wow, but a lot, like 9 really, like I can feel 9 a lot too. So it's because she scored 3. I have another friend of mine who scores high 6 and high 1 and goes back and forth. Like, I don't know which one I am. And that's okay. It's part of this exploration process of figuring out where you land. So just know that when it comes to your scores, they all make a difference.
Are there any, I don't even know if there are conflicting numbers in that sense, but can you have high numbers in one, or not specific number 1, but can you have a high score in one area, and then almost opposite sense have a high score? Like, would your high scores ever be like, what? That's odd to hold attention.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, there's nothing to say you couldn't. The bigger thing you see mostly is that there are certain numbers that look similar. So, for example, 4s and 7s have similar echoes to each other, but their internal motivation is different. And so you could look at a 4 and be like, that guy's a 7. You know what I mean? Or you could look at a 7 and go, that guy looks a 4. 6s and maybe 1s? No. 6s and 9s are similar. 1s and 3s can look similar. So it's more so. This is where a test actually could be helpful. If you're fuzzy, right? Some people just start to read their little profile sheet, or they start reading Ian Cron's book, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm this. Like I'm a 3. Like it's super obvious. And look at they show their husband, and he's like, oh, that's so you. It's scary, right? Some people it's really clear. Others of us, it's not, and you're like, I could be or I might be. That's where taking a test, like a paid test, is helpful. We've gotten it now where we get the test for about $20 a person. The church covers half the cost, and then the person covers $20, so it's more affordable. That's where it helps you kind of like discern and really kind of hone in on what the core numbers are. But yeah, you could have, I mean, odds are you're not going to see a high 3 and a high 6. So 3s are like the achievers. They're like super driven. 6s are more reserved. So obviously those feel like they're in opposition to one another. Odds are you're not going to do that, but there's no reason to say that it couldn't exist. But odds are, I think you're right, you wouldn't necessarily see those two things with each other. Okay, so that makes sense. Everyone understand the idea of the triads, the arrows, what resourceful and non-resourceful or less resourceful means? Okay, now wings. I am shocked at how many people don't understand wings because it's called wings. So the amount of people who go to be like, oh yeah, I'm a 9 with a 5 wing. No, you're not. You can't be a 9 with a 5 wing. Your wing can only be the number on either side of your core number. So if you're a 9, you could either be a 9 with a 1 wing or a 9 with an 8 wing. Wings are really, really helpful in helping you kind of see the nuance in your number because your wing is going to probably have more influence on your personality. It's going to have the second most influence on who you are as your primary number is. So like let's use an example. An 8 with a 7 wing, that's me, is very different personality than an 8 with a 9 wing. Aaron's, you're cool? Yeah, so Aaron's an 8 with a 9 wing. There's some similarities. There's things we're here like, oh yeah, we totally are seeing the same. We can basically read each other's minds. But in how our disposition is, they're very different. I'm far more obnoxious than Aaron is out loud. His obnoxiousness stays internal. Mine expresses itself, right? So that's how it is. He's going to be a little more mellow, a little more introverted. He's going to be actually that's not true. He's going to be a little more mellow and actually more relational, like interconnected relationally than an 8 with a 7 wing. 8s with a 7 wing are a little more like, we're an overwhelming personality. We can be. So we have to like dial ourselves down. Like, whoa. People are like, hey, especially certain numbers like 6s. Right, Kylie? Yeah, exactly. And so what it does is your wing helps bring out traits and characteristics of your core personality. So understanding your wing and then understanding what your wing is and then reading about those two, so like a 9 with a 1 wing or a 9 with an 8 wing, is going to help peel back some layers and give you some cool nuances about it. And so that's where wings become really helpful. Okay, before we move on to each number, so we're doing good on time, questions, thoughts?
I have one. So if your wing is the second most influence apart from your core number, what if it's not your like second highest overall score? Because like my second highest overall score is a 5.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you're probably going to, I still think the wing will have more shaping of kind of your overall you-ness, for lack of a better term, but you're going to pull a lot from that 5, right? And also let's see, we'll have to look at it. It's hard to keep them all squared in my head. So with a 1, yeah, because you move towards 4 and towards 7. So yeah, so the fact that you have a high 5, that 5's going to have influence for sure. But I still would bet that wing actually, because it's so, it's just more, I think it's more integrated. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe that 5 pulls more. I don't know. Be interesting to see. Let me know.
something I never understood.
Yeah.
Part, so I was like, I want to find that out.
Yeah, and if what we talked about is true, and so let's say your 5 score is above 60%, right? Then that's going to have significant influence, right? You're going to pull from that in different ways. But that, in many ways, from my experience, and again, other people teach it differently and will think differently, I find that the wing has a more immediate connection to who you are. I should have brought my test score. I could have looked at it to kind of get some ideas. Because I know, like, like a handful of numbers in like the 70s and 80s, I see my 7 wing far more clearly than I do anything else. You know, I see some 1 in me. I have some 1. I have some perfectionism, and I have some 3, some achiever in me. But that 7 wing, I think I have more immediate access to the playful side, the fun side, and so that's why I think the 8 wing probably has more influence, even though you have a higher score in the other place. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, we're literally gonna walk through each of the 9 numbers and kind of give a brief outline. So we're gonna start with the 2s.
That's a joke, right?
Nope, starting with 2s. So I'm working in triad. So we're starting with 2, 3s, and 4s, then we'll do 5, 6, and 7, then we're ending with 8s, 9s, and 1s. So 2s are in the heart and shame triad. 2s are called the helper or the giver. There's different names for them. Different people have said different things. Anyone a 2 here who wants to admit it? You're a 2, that's right. We got a 2. You think you're a 2? You're kind of going between 2 and 1, right? You're kind of on the fence. So 2s need to be needed. They're helpers. So that's the 2. The 2's core thing is they need to be needed. 2s have some amazing superpowers. If you have 2s in your life, you want 2s in your life. You want all members in your life. 2s are amazing. So the superpower of the 2 is the ability to discern and engage in helping others. 2s have this kind of relational spidey sense. So they're able to see what other people are feeling without necessarily it being expressed and discern their needs and go actually help them in meaningful ways. It's an amazing thing. 2s, it's just, if you said, hey, how do you do that? It'd be like, well, I just do it. Like right? Like you just look at something, you're like, I think I know what's really going on there. Like we even talked about some of the tension that you noticed between me and another staff person at Cornerstone Rockwall, and you were like, yeah, I always thought, like, I don't think you guys got along. Super discerning about something that was pretty well hidden generally, right? So there was a sense, like 2s have this innate ability to see disconnect, and they have this like desire to help. They're caring, kind, supportive, generous. 2s are great listeners. If you're a 4 and you want to share a lot of words, call a 2. Because 8s don't want to listen to you. I just want you to know that. They're intuitive about needs. They're very relationally oriented, very welcoming. A lot of 2s have the gift of hospitality, if you want to pull it into kind of biblical thought process, like that they just love people. They love loving people. They love serving people. If any of this is wrong, tell me. But there's this deep desire in them to do that. 2s envision making the world a more loving place to live in, if you want to think of it that way. Like that's what a 2 wants. A 2 wants to bring people together, good wine, good food, good fun. Like that's what 2s, they want to see relational interconnectedness. The core lie of the 2, and you'll see a pattern of kind of my notes in this. The core lie of the 2 is that if I can't help others, I'm not worthy of love. And so when a 2 is unhealthy, what they're doing is they're taking that gift that they have and basically attaching their identity to it. And so the lie that the 2 tends to believe, and again, all of this is should and can, not that they do, it's not a box. But there tends to be a core lie in the heart of the 2 that says, if I'm not worthy of love unless I can be helpful, unless I can serve, unless I can make a difference, unless I can make an impact. The core lie of a 2, the core fear of a 2 obviously then is being less than everything for everyone will lead to rejection. So if they can't be everything for everyone at all times, they're going to be rejected. And I'm not worth it. Like if I can't fix that and help them, like this is 2s. 2s are closet, or not closet, they're classic codependents. I'm okay as long as you're okay with me. They're classic codependents. Here's where it gets interesting. The deadly sin of the 2, this is using Ian Cron's language, is pride. And you would go, wait, what? Like how's pride the deadly sin? Because 2s give the impression that they have no needs of their own. So what 2s do, their mechanism is that they're going to help everyone and never acknowledge their own needs, never explore what they really need, be unwilling to express their needs because they feel like, well, if I need someone else, then I'm not worthy of love. Like I've missed the mark, right? So twos will give themselves away and give themselves away and give themselves away and never deal with themselves, and they drain themselves. Again, this is classic codependency, right? And so they give this impression that they have no need of their own. Twos like to think that they are Superman or Superwoman, that I can help everyone. No, I can get it. I got it. I can take care of it, right? And so there's a pride that sits under the surface of that they can be all things to all people at all times, and they don't need anything from anyone. And that's a lie. That's not true, right? So their core strategy is to gain love and acceptance through being needed. I love you and you need me, therefore you won't reject me. So if you need me, you can't reject me. So this is the manipulative side of the twos. So the twos, in a manipulative way, will compel people to need them so that they can stay connected to them. It gets super sketchy. It can get really off in the weeds. The other core strategy of the twos is that if I focus on your needs, you won't ask me about mine. So twos are the ones that you sit across at coffee and you're like, hey, how's it going? They're like, oh, I'm going great. Hey, so what's going on with you? How's this? Like, then they'll go right into like the big deals, and then you're like, oh yeah, well, I got to tell you about that. And they will instantly like kind of take their needs and be like, yeah, we're not going to talk about those right now. We're just going to push those off to the side. Under stress, eights or twos move to 8 under stress, which is the challenger. And so what can happen is twos in a non-resourceful way under stress, they can become angry and controlling and resentful when they're not appreciated. Resentfulness is a huge issue for twos because they start this kind of martyrdom complex. Like, no one helps as much as me, and no one cares for everyone as much as me. So in an unresourceful way or less resourceful, they can become angry and controlling and resentful when not appreciated. In a resourceful way towards the 8, they can become amazing advocates for people, especially people in need, especially people who are marginalized. Like twos are great in jumping into that. That's one of the things of the 8. Under security, they move towards 4, which is called the Individualist. Under security, in a positive way, twos can begin to experience the full range of emotion for themselves and then be able to express that. Like, hey, I need this from you. Hey, I'm feeling this way and I could really use this kind of help, which that sounds like a terrifying idea, right? To have to say that out loud. Yeah. Yes, totally. And that's the thing. Like, so twos beginning to understand what I need. And then the first time a 2 says what they need to someone they love, it feels super overwhelming to the 2 and to the other person because they've never heard him say that. I was leading another guy through who's a 2. And he went back with his wife and he started kind of saying, hey, I really could use your help with this. And she was like, whoa, like she freaked out. And she at first she said it felt like almost mean, but it wasn't mean. It's just he had never asked for anything ever. And all of a sudden it felt really shocking. So growing in that area feels like it can be very overwhelming at first because the idea of expressing a need cuts at the core of your value. Like all of a sudden I'm less valuable because I have needs, which isn't true because everyone has needs, right?
And if he says he can't, then it's like a big thing.
Yeah, now it's like, oh.
I asked for it and now you can't.
Yeah, or if you're ignored, like the fear of rejection in that, if you're like, hey, I need this, and then you get rejected, like that fear is terrifying for all numbers, but especially in light of these core things within the 2. So under security, they can move towards 4, which means they experience a full range of emotions. The negative side or the less resourceful side of 4 would be that they could become emotionally manipulative. Like I said, they could manipulate people to get them to need them there's like a narcissism that can kind of feed in where they can pull people into themselves. A resourceful 2 is helpful but not overly attached their helpfulness to their identity. A resourceful 2 is also aware of their own needs and able to articulate them, like we just mentioned. A less resourceful 2 becomes very codependent. They need to be needed. They often become resentful. So that's a great warning flag for a 2, internal resentment. Like if you're a 2 and you start feeling very resentful towards people around you, no one else but me seems to care. No one else seems to do anything. Why am I the one always doing that? That's an unhealthy side of a 2. 2s are also very sensitive to criticism. They're actually the most sensitive to criticism of all the numbers on the Enneagram. And so if you have a 2 in your life, move gently and move slowly when there's things to confront and issues to deal with. Coming in strong usually will create a defense mechanism and a pushback. Would you agree? You're like, yeah, I'm aware. Blind spots for twos. They struggle to identify and express their own needs because having needs equals a loss of identity and value. And their other blind spot is they avoid their needs because they can't be helpers and helpees at the same time. And like I said, their warning lights are resentment and entitlement.
Warning light for a 2 is resentment. Is there a number where resentment is like a normal and a good thing? 'Cause that's probably-
Yeah, we're getting to you. Just hang loose. You just buckle up, Buttercup. We'll get there. Okay, threes. Threes are called the achiever or the performer. Threes are your classic type A personalities. Driven, efficient. Let me switch my slide. Gotta love the threes. Threes get stuff done. If you need stuff done, call a 3. If you need stuff done to the best of its possible abilities, call a 3. Their superpowers are that they are optimistic. They tend to be very big dreamers. They're very resilient. So threes are great when things go sideways. They can find a new way and move a path forward. They can be very inspiring personalities depending on their wing. Threes envision making the world a more productive, organized, efficient, and smooth-running place. The effective person is naturally well-organized, knows how to set goals and work towards them and accomplish things efficiently. Threes don't need people pushing them along. They need you to get the heck out of their way. That's what threes need. Because for a 3, more often than not, you're slowing them down, not helping them along. That's how threes think, right? Any threes here that we know? Okay. The core lie of a 3 is that they are lovable based on what they can achieve. That their inherent value comes from their achievements. So you can see how that could be super dangerous, right? The core fear of a 3 is being exposed. The idea of being exposed as not everything they desire to be, optimistically, and going through life never being truly known. Threes have a negative tendency to make people commodities because they're so focused on achieving. So again, a person becomes either an obstacle in their way or a means by which they need to get things done. And so it makes threes struggle to have meaningfully deep relationships because of that. Let's see. The deadly sin of the 3 is deceit, and that is in crafting a persona that they make of who they are, like basically a false self, and then they end up getting lost in that false self. So they become their achievements in some ways. And they hear so much, man, look at that, you got through that so fast. Look how you're doing an amazing job. And they know that that's only a persona in the deepest parts of who they are. But then it's almost like they start to believe the press that's written about them. Like, yeah, I am amazing. Oh gosh, I'm phenomenal, right? And they end up getting lost in the persona and they lose their true self and they lose some of the more holistic, healthy parts of themselves. They presenting the accomplished version of themselves. So even in failures, 3s are really good at spinning things to make them seem like they were amazing, even though they sucked. So they're really good at going like, no, that wasn't a failure. That was just an opportunity for success, right? Like 3s are great at spinning things in their own heart and mind because they need that because achieving is so core to their value. They need that to move forward. And then there's a tendency to begin to believe the version they've created of themselves. Their core strategy is to be seen as successful and accomplished to win admiration. Kind of like 8s. 8s are very similar. What 3s want deeply is to be known and loved, but they'll settle for being admired. So they'll allow being admired to be enough, but really what they really want is to be known and loved for who they are, in all of their flaws and all of their weakness and all their brokenness. Basically, a 3 would say, I am successful and confident, therefore you will admire me and not overlook me. Under stress, 3s move towards 9, which is the peacemaker, which means a 3 can become very, and on the less resourceful side, 3s can become very passive-aggressive or check out under stress, so they can become manipulative emotionally that way. If they move to the resourceful side of 9, then they become very good at bringing fractured relationships together and helping see like all sides of an argument. Because 9s are this is what 9 superpower is. It's the ability to see kind of all sides of an argument and be able to go like, well, hey, like I got common ground. Like we can all work around this. They're like great negotiators. And so a A 9, if a 9's under, I mean, I'm sorry, if a 3's under stress and they go to the high side of that 9, they actually become really good at bringing people together and getting the goal accomplished, right? So that's a really positive thing. Under security, 3's move to 6, which is called the Loyalist, which in a healthy way, they become more committed to others and less self-focused. So they, in a healthy way, under secure conditions, a 3 can become less, in essence, narcissistic about their achievements and more about like, hey, how can we get everyone? How do we move this organization along? How do we get our family moving? Like they tend to broaden out and become more relational because 6s are super relational. On the negative side, they can get hung up in analysis paralysis. They can get stuck in fear and anxiety and like, I can't move forward until, so they just freeze up. Resourceful side of a 3 is get her done. That's the resourceful side of a 3. They get it done. They're self-motivated and help others to get things done as well. They see others, they see the potential of others and help them maximize it practically. They're dynamic, organized, they're great team builders. On a less resourceful side, they can become very self-conscious, prone to presenting a version of themselves, so they fall into the idea of vanity. They become goal-oriented in order to earn praise, and they value programs over and achievements over people. And like I said, people become a commodity in order to be seen as successful. So their team becomes less people and more a way that they can be seen as successful. That's the dark side. So the blind spots, they avoid failure and efficiency because they are always successful and efficient. So they convince themselves and others that they are succeeding even when they're not. How's your marriage? Oh, it's fine, man. We're doing amazing. It's great. It's like, is it though? Right? So 3s need people deeply. 3s can be helped in growing in vulnerability. The ability to sit with someone and go, yeah, no, it's not going that well. So that, like, the exercising vulnerability is a huge thing. 3s are also good at convincing themselves and others that they are efficient when they're not. So 3s usually, I think, I might be overstating this, but 3s usually have at least one hidden area of their life, like one closet, that's chaos, that isn't organized and isn't overachieved, that they keep well hidden from the rest of the world. It might be a drawer in their desk, but there's some space of their world that is not as organized and not as presented as well. Warning lights for 3s, workaholism, impatience, that's a huge one. You see impatience, and if you're a 3, that's an issue. Scheming, manipulative, and just an avoidance of feelings altogether. Those are warning lights for the 3s. Okay, keep chugging. Anyone? Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Are we moving to the 4s? All right. 4s are fun. 4s are the individualist or the romantic. 4s are all about being individually unique and original. Like, they don't want to be like anyone else. Like, they want to be them and the only them in the world. Like, 4s love, like Psalm 139. You were fearfully and wonderfully made. I knew you in your mother's womb. They're like, yeah. 4s are the theater kids, right? Jazz hands. 4s paint their nails black, wear a guy liner, listen to emo music. 4s have all the emotions at all times at their disposal. It's all there. 2 and 8 feels exhausting. But 4s love it. They swim in waters of emotion. The superpower for the 4, they are artistic. They're creative. They're very original, imaginative individuals. 4s have probably the highest emotional awareness of any number on the Enneagram. They're very intuitive about their own emotions and about the emotions of others. Now, it might be a giant cluttered mess, but they're aware of all of it at all times. They feel feelings inside of feelings on top of feelings around their other feelings. Like, it's a lot of feeling going on. They're the ones that cry at, like, AT&T commercials. I think that's a 4, right? They have a strong emotional awareness in their self, and they're very intuitive about what other people might be feeling or experiencing. I think 4s would make great counselors. A healthy 4 would make a great counselor, right? They have strong empathy and care for others, and they seem to be particularly attuned to pain and suffering. Fours seem to be able to pick out of the crowd the person that's genuinely hurting, even though they may not be displaying it. Again, like a spidey sense kind of thing. Fours love making things and people beautiful. They love beauty. So most artists, like real artists, are fours. They love beauty. And they find beauty in darkness. So this is what fours can find the beauty in the dark spaces as well as the light spaces. Like fours are just attuned to finding beauty in everything. They're highly attuned to quality. So like interior designers, a lot of probably interior, I would bet, Joanna Gaines is probably a 4. Highly attuned to aesthetic. They have a very high aesthetic sense. And they're very expressive. They can be very expressive and dramatic. They can be very expressive and dramatic. They don't always have to be. The core lie of the 4 is that if they're not special or unique, they're not lovable. So they pursue uniqueness and being distinct and standing out in the crowd as a form of identity. In other words, because I am different, I am uniquely broken and unlovable. So there's a sense that the funny thing is, as much as they want to be unique, they also can see that as why they're more broken or more messy or more jacked up than anyone else. So they almost set themselves apart in that way.
So there's the lie is, if I'm not special and unique, I won't be loved.
Correct.
But because I'm so special and unique, I am unlovable.
I am broken. Yeah, exactly. Messy, huh? Yes, it gets super muddy. It's crazy how this happens. 4s love to long. They long for everything. I long for a sunset, for a long walk, long for peace and freedom and, kumbaya. Like they just love to long for things. 4s tend to have this kind of prevailing feeling that they are out of step with the rest of the world. That's why 4s gravitate to one another, because they can be unique together. But 4s tend to look at the world and be like, why am I the weird one? Like there's just something in them that be like, why am I so much weirder than, like, no one else is crying at this AT&T commercial, but I'm going to cry at the AT&T, you know what I mean? So there's the part of that uniqueness that creates a longing in them, like they don't fit in the world around them. The core fear of the 4 is abandonment. In other words, that I'll never find my space in this world and I'll never be loved because I'm so different. And we could talk about, we don't have time, but reaction formation. So a lot of why you see a 4 who desires to fit in, start painting their nails black and listening to emo music is because they're doing what's called reaction formation. They're doing the exact opposite of what would actually bring them the wholeness they're looking for. But we don't have time to get into reaction formation. That's a whole nother session.
I want you to know that I never painted my nails black. I didn't have gauges.
Yeah, and there we go. The core strategy of the 4 is to feel special, unique in order to gain love and attention. And because I'm special, I'm worthy of love, and you won't abandon me. Under stress, 4s move towards 2, which is the helper. They can become codependent or manipulative. In other words, make people to need them or give them attention, right? That could be one side of it. Or they could become amazing relationally and help others see the beauty in life. So again, the 4s have this amazing capacity to catalyze people and bring the best out of people. Like I know a 4, I think he's a 4, who when we did a college small group in Rockwall, when he was there, the dynamic of the room changed every time he walked through the front door. Because 4s are just instinctively able to they find the recluse sitting in the corner and they make them feel involved and they make them feel important, and they're just good at that stuff. That's what 4s do amazingly well. The core sin of the 4 is envy. They're not envious of other people's possessions. They desire others' characteristics and lifestyles. I wish I could be stable and balanced. I wish I didn't have as many emotions. I wish I could be more organized. So their envy goes more so into the internal side of people. They don't envy a car. I wish I could have a Tesla. It's internal. They're emotional beings. And so that's what their envy is. They tend to envy those types of things. They compare themselves significantly. 4s struggle with comparison. That's a huge issue for 4s. They're hyper aware of their own differences and deficiencies, and because of that, they tend to compare. So there's a hypersensitivity to their own weaknesses. Their core strategy is to feel special, unique in order to gain love and attention. like I said. And then under stress, they move towards 2, so they can become codependent or become great relationally. Under security, they move towards 1, which is the reformer, otherwise sometimes being called the perfectionist. So under security, a 4 can begin to act on the ideals in a more objective and organized fashion. And so they become less self-focused and more organized, more of a self-starter, I guess you could say. Under security, though, also, they can begin to really hear the one's inner self-critic, which is the I should and I ought to do these things. Like they want to invest themselves in beauty, but there's a part inside them that's like, well, but I should be, doing this, and I ought to do those things. And so that inner critic conflicts with their 4, their kind of natural self. And so that can become a tension for them. So that's under 4. Resourceful 4s have a high emotional intelligence and intuition. They know what people feel. They're great at empathy, great at counseling, great at art, great at anything expressive. You ever listen to a song and you're like, it's like that guy got into my mind when you wrote that song. That's a 4. 4s are great at helping the rest of us connect to emotions. That's why for those of us who are emotionally stunted, hanging out with 4s is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. The less resourceful side is that they feel misunderstood, exaggerate their needs to feel special, so they can get so 4s have, their emotions are either really, really big or really, really, really low. There is no balance in middle ground. Like a 4 is never going to be like, fine. Like that's just not who they are. They're either like, it's amazing, you can't believe it, or it's like, this is the worst thing ever, and I don't know what to do. Like they're polarized in every way. They avoid what is ordinary at all costs. In a less resourceful way, they can become demandingly narcissistic. In other words, look at me, pay attention to me. That the 4s can lean towards that. And they will do things and act in ways in order to elicit that out of people, even negative things. They'll do negative things to get the attention, even though they know it's a negative thing. They nurse wounds, they hold grudges, and they tend to internalize the unhealth of others. So when you talk about bad company corrupting good character, that goes for 4s probably more than any other number in the Enneagram. 4s have more of a proclivity to internalize the negativity of others. So if a 4 hangs out with a bunch of negative Nancys, they're not going to be happy people to be around. So 4s need to find balance in toxic relationships to be able to be in a healthy place where they can, or at least be able to have a balance of the 2 types of relationships. They can become dark and moody. They tend to sulk. And actually enjoy their troubles unconsciously. So there's a part of the 4 that actually likes when things aren't going well, because they can just kind of stew in it a little bit. Like, there's melancholy is like a comfortable pair of jeans for a lot of 4s. It's just kind of like, that's just where they're at. They can have a martyr complex. No one suffers like me. No one feels what I feel. No one's done what I've done. No one's seen what I've seen. There's a martyr complex in them. They're blind spots. 4s can be very emotionally overwhelming to other people. Like people are like, oh, hey, how's it going? Like, especially other numbers that are more subdued, a 4 can feel extremely overwhelming, especially their swings. They're really kind of swings in relationship. Again, they tend towards narcissism and self-focus. They tend to project their feelings onto others. So if they're feeling down, then you must be feeling down. Like, are you sure you're okay? Because you don't look very good. Like there's a tendency that they will take, stop laughing. They will take what's inside of them and they'll project it onto the people around them. And we all do this to a degree, but 4s specifically because emotions are so out loud for them. Criticism of a 4 activates shame immediately. So when you criticize a 4, even if you're doing it lovingly, it instantly activates shame inside of them. Which can cause them to retreat or act out in ways that they wouldn't normally do that. And they can be controlled by their feelings. 4s struggle to just be faithful. They so devalue what is ordinary that the idea of just faithfulness to go to work every day and do my job and love my friends and just be stable, that feels so boring and unfulfilling to them that they struggle with it. They struggle with just faithfulness in life. So warning lights. Yeah, you will. They'll envy people that do that. Yeah, absolutely. Because they long for it. Yeah. They long for the stability. It's like, man, if I could just get my crap together and just be stable.
But it feels mundane. You do it yourself.
Exactly.
This person's insane.
I'm not saying anything. Doesn't feel into the other people who aren't fours look at fours and go, man, I wish I had that kind of emotional bandwidth. I'm just saying. If you don't like it, it's likely your number. Warning lights for fours: comparison, longing for who others are, melancholy, the grudges and the bitterness. Those are the things that help a four to see that they're not in a healthy space. Okay, keep going. We're gonna with the fly. I knew this was gonna be long. Fives. Fives are the thinkers. We got a couple fives in here, don't we? Do we? We got 1 5. 1 5. Fives are called the thinker or the investigator. What? Oh. Fives are called so now we're in the head triad and fear. So head and fear, we're in that triad. Fives are the thinker, the investigator. Their superpower, the superpower of the five is objectivity, rationality, and clarity. Fives are very innovative, very discerning and strategic. They're able to detach from emotions in order to make a decision. Like fives are the ones you want in a crisis when everyone else is running around with their hair caught on fire, because they're the ones who are like, I know how to put out fires. We can do this, right? Fives are helpful to fours. Like, hey, bro, we got this. We can do this. They're able to detach emotions from decisions. Fives are really good at knowing what to do in gray areas. So much of life is gray, right? And so many of us are like, I don't know what to do. Fives are really good at gathering data and then being able to go, this would make sense. Like, this is the right decision. You can move towards this. So where fives really actually flourish in that area. They're very, very gifted observers. Fives are usually more introverted than extroverted. Fives don't like to experience life. They like to watch it. So fives are like, let's hang out and watch. No, you guys go ahead. I'll be here taking notes if you need anything, right? True?
Yeah, I was a kid that didn't Easter egg hunt.
Yeah.
I hated it.
Yep.
I loved watching it.
I'm going to watch it. I'm cool being here. I don't want to not be here, but I'm going to watch. I'm not going to necessarily jump in, right? Fives are great listeners. They're very perceptive. Fives tend to be informed in many areas because they're thinkers, because they're so head-oriented. They like to pull in a lot of data about a lot of different things. So fives are going to have a little bit of knowledge about a lot of different things. And so they're good. You're smiling.
I'll have to send you the video.
So fives are the kind of people who like to go watch random how-to videos on YouTube for hours on end. There you go. Yeah. They just love information. Information is their friend. Information is entertainment for fives. That's where they find life. They're very perceptive, informed in many areas, and their core lie is that the world is a dangerous and intrusive and overwhelming place, and there's not enough to go around. So fives live with a prevailing scarcity mindset. Not necessarily about stuff. They're not necessarily hoarding stuff, but they hoard emotions. That's probably the primary thing that fives hoard is emotions. Emotions and time. So they become very protective of themselves, of their time and their emotions and how it's expressed and who gets it. Because they feel like there's not enough of them to go around.
There's not enough interpersonal bandwidth to go around?
Correct. Yeah, not enough person to go around. That's a good way of saying it. The core fear of the five is being seen as incompetent or incapable and not having anything to offer. So what would terrify a five is to be in a situation where they couldn't help. They didn't have the information. They're like, I don't know. Like, I don't know is probably the worst thing for a five to have to say out loud. Probably the most important thing for a five to learn to say. But it's probably the worst thing for a five to have to say is, I don't know. Fives tend to live with an inner emptiness, kind of like a longing, kind of like fours. They have this inner longingness. But the way they seek filling it is through information, data. They want to gather it through information. The deadly sin of the five is greed. But a better word, and it's not a word we use anymore, is a word called avarice. It's not greed in the sense of like stuff, like I'm going to hoard my stuff. It's more so greedy about themselves as a person. And they're going to keep people at arm's length. They're going to insulate and isolate. They're going to spend a lot of time in their head. Fives are crock pots. They got to think about things. You cannot just spring something on a five and say, hey, what do you think about this? Like fives are like, I'll call you later. Like, give me some time. So they need the time to process, to get information, to pull in the data. They hoard and protect who they are. They have, in many ways, an excessive need for knowledge in order to feel secure. In other words, a 5 can't feel secure unless they have enough knowledge, and they can never have enough knowledge, and so they always struggle to feel secure. So there's just this constant longing for those feelings of security through knowledge. This was a great quote, and I forget which book it was in, but it said that 5s look to knowledge to provide what most of us look for in relationships, which is love, comfort, and support. It's a very fascinating thing about 5s. It's the only number that does something like this. Most of us will seek love, comfort, and support from relationships with other people. 5s get it through data. Like that's where their safe space is actually not necessarily in an interpersonal relationship. Now their wings will actually change this. So a 5 with a 4 wing is going to be a lot more relational. A 5 with a 6 wing is going to have some more relational components to them. But just the inerrance of the 5 shows some of these things. The core strategy of the 5 is to insulate and protect. They hoard their time, their treasure, their talent, their energies. They will tend to insulate themselves from emotional and spiritual harm. So the protective measure is insulation and isolation. Put up some big walls. Big fences make great neighbors, right? That's the 5. That's the 5's motto. Under stress, though, 5s can move to 7, which is the enthusiast. On the negative side, or on the less resourceful side of 7, 5s can become easily distracted, and they can waste a lot of money and energy on things that are just nominally interesting to them. So they'll just they'll Netflix all night. They'll just burn energy. And so they can be easily distracted when under stress. So that's kind of an escape mechanism. So if 5s feel like a lot of pressure, they may escape to mindless hours of television or video games or things like that. That can be the tendency. But on the positive side, the resourceful side, they actually can become more playful and energetic under stress. So they actually can be the ones that actually start lifting the room up on the resourceful side of a 5. The resourceful side of 7. Under security, 5s move towards 8, the challenger. They become more energetic and active. They're able to take initiative and engage the world. Remember, 5s, they're seeing the world as it's dangerous, and so they're going to be more reserved, right? But when they're in a secure place, they become far more able to be like, all right, let's go, let's do this. We can get it done. I can take initiative. I can engage the world. So a healthier 5 under security starts to do that. But under security also, they can, in order to gain control, if they start to feel a sense of a loss of control, they get big. They yell, scream. They'll get big in order to regain the control that they feel like they're losing. So that's what they can move under 5. 5 under move towards 8. The resourceful side of a 5 is that they're innovative. They think about new ways to do things. They don't like the tried and true path. Like 5s are always going like, well, what if we tried it this way? Or I wonder if we could, like they're very inventive in those ways, always thinking of new things like that. You know, you think of guys like Nikola Tesla, like that's the type of personality. Someone's always like, well, I know it works like that, but I wonder if like 5s think and process that way about the whole world. They're very gifted at observing. They're balanced. A resourceful 5 has a balance of their thinking and their feeling and are able to engage emotionally with those close to them. They're endlessly curious about meaningful things, both inwardly and outwardly. So 5s who are healthy are learners, like the ultimate learners. I want to learn more about myself. I want to learn more about people. I want to learn more about this stuff. So they'll make pie charts to better understand their Enneagram numbers, and they'll like draw graphs. Like they want the information is part of how they process the world. A less resourceful 5 becomes insulated and isolated. They're unable, oftentimes, to discern and express feeling. They hoard, they protect, and an unhealthy 5 will tend to spend more time thinking about life than actually living life. And so they spend a lot of time kind of processing what life could be without actually engaging it and living it. And so they spend a lot of time on the sidelines. Blind spots are detached, emotionally stunted, overly skeptical, can be critical, stubborn. They get stuck in analysis paralysis and can't move forward. So 5s, if they don't feel like they have enough data, they don't want to move forward, and so they can just get stuck in the space where it's like they don't trust. Ironically, 5s have a lot of access to their gut instinct, and it's actually pretty attuned. They just don't trust it because they spend so much time in their head. So like balance for a 5, and we don't have time to do this with all the numbers, but balance for a 5 is beginning to bring other people in on the journey and go, well, I think this is what we want to do, but what do you think? And trusting their gut instinct more in conjunction in relationship with people they trust, whether a spouse or close friends. So that's the type of thing that you can do as a 5 to start to balance. Warning lights, the detachment, withdrawing from relationships, and that paralysis analysis, as well as becoming overly skeptical and critical of everything's a yeah, but is a dangerous part for them. All right, 6s, we're almost there. We're getting super close. Superpower of the 6. The 6 is called the Loyalist or faithful. 6s are amazing. So superpower of the 6 is that they are relational, reliable, responsible, they're consistent. 6s are great troubleshooters. They're very soothing people. They're steady and dependable. They're great at systems. So if you need someone to kind of manage and operate and help like maximize a system that you have, 6s flourish in these areas. They're great partners, great teammates, faithful in relationships, protective, and they're highly adept at sensing danger. 6s know what's going to go wrong before it ever even comes close to going wrong, or at least they know what they think could go wrong, and they have 32 contingency plans in place just in case one of them happens to come true. And I've got 24 more contingency plans for the 32 contingency plans, so we're good.
They're prepared.
Oh gosh.
Did you say prepared?
That is a perfect word to describe the 6, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's gonna happen. So I'm saying that it's not gonna happen.
Batman's a 6?
Well, Alfred is. I don't know if Batman is, but Batman couldn't be because he did too many crazy things.
Oh.
I think the mantra of the 6 is whoa, 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 whoa. Like that's the mantra of the 6. Everyone slow down, right? 6s inherently see the world as a dangerous place. And they really feel a sense that it's their duty to protect themselves and the people that they care about. Like 6s are the ones in the car that, even though your seatbelt's on, their hand still goes out to protect you. Like that's kind of the nature of the 6. Here's the thing, the core lie of the 6 is that they believe that the world is dangerous and it's on them to protect themselves and those around them. And in other words, that they have to prove themselves to be the protector. That's an incredible amount of weight to put on yourself in a broken and messy world, to have to carry all of that. And that tends to be one of the core lies of the 6. The core fear of the 6 is being caught off guard, not being in control when things go wrong. There's probably nothing more terrifying for a 6 than not being able to anticipate would go wrong and having something go wrong. Because there's a desire to control and protect that obviously that gets shaken. The fear of what can go wrong will go wrong. In other words, 6s live even under a good day. Like in the best season of their lives, 6s have a when's the other shoe going to fall though? Like it's going to go sideways at some point. The question is when. So there's like a prevailing pessimism oftentimes in 6s. Where they struggle to experience the moment at the moment and enjoy it as it is because they're kind of always planning and protecting. They tend to miss out on the joy in life because of that, because they're so worried about the next potential problem. And so experiencing the moment and being able to really enjoy the moment with friends and family and experiences is hard for 6s because oftentimes they feel like they're kind of always in mitigation mode, always kind of trying to make sure everything's safe. The deadly sin of the 6 is fear. But I actually think fear is probably, so it's more so anxiety than fear. So fear has an object to it. So I'm afraid of snakes. Anxiety is I'm afraid of something. I don't know what it is, but I know it's there and I'm afraid of it. And so 6s tend to live in this prevailing anxiety of what could go wrong. And they're sadly in some ways, their imagination is far better than the reality. So they're very good at imagining what could go wrong beyond any scope of what probably will go wrong in any way, shape, or form. But then that shapes how they view and live and process and present and all those kinds of things. And so that imagination of what could go wrong drives them to protect. The core, they have a deep need to feel secure. So that's where the anxiety comes from, right? 6s desperately want to feel a sense of safety and security. That's kind of their deepest heart longing, I think. The core strategy is because I do what I am supposed to, I'm worthy of love. And if I'm prepared for everything, then I can be secure and safe. So like that safety and security is kind of that core thing. Like if I make sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted, then I can be safe. The problem is there's always something beyond the T and the I that isn't crossed and dotted. And so it's just kind of this perpetualness to it. Under stress, the 6 moves to 3, which is the achiever. And so on the downside, they can try and impress and use others to gain acceptance and love. On the upside of the achiever, they can become far more secure in a more resourceful area. They become more action-oriented, proactive instead of reactive. 6s tend to live reactively. When they're in a healthy space, they become more proactive, more purposeful in what they do. So they're not just worried about the potholes they step in. They're looking at them and they're moving around them. They're not just waiting for things to happen. Under security, 6s move towards 9, which is the peacemaker. They can become more trusting of others and less skeptical of people's motives. 6s are always inherently skeptical of people's motives. It's hard for them to believe the best in people. So you think about that Corinthians passage, love hopes all things, believes all things, endures all things. That's a really hard thing for a truth. That's a really hard truth for a 6 to embrace. Because there's a sense that there's a skepticism about everyone and everything, like kind of a low grade. It isn't necessarily a high grade, but there's a low grade skepticism around it. But under security, they move towards 9, which is the peacemaker. They become more trusting of others and less skeptical of motives. They become more balanced and stable, and they actually can learn how to go with the flow. And so not having to have it all planned out, able to kind of operate in the moment, that becomes something that they find some freedom in that. Under security, though, also the downside of 9 is that they can become apathetic and or very stubborn about that, where they just are like, no, this is what we do. This is how we do it. This is the way we do things. The resourceful 6 trusts their own instincts, their own viewpoints, and their inner self. 6s struggle to trust their own inner self. And so a resourceful 6 begins to listen to their own viewpoint. They see the world through a balanced lens of good and bad, and they're less prone to try and control everything. A healthy 6 becomes less dependent on the opinions of others. 6s like to hitch their wagons to what they perceive as people who are powerful or trustworthy or like in control. They want to hitch to those people and ride their coattails in many ways, because then they don't have to be the bottom line. 6s hate being in charge. They love being the other guy. They love being the puppeteer behind the curtain. They don't want to be the guy out front of the curtain at all, ever. 6s love. That's why they're so good at being loyal and supportive, especially of trusted relationships. So they're less dependent on those others. They're more courageous to be themselves when they're resourceful. They're reliable. They're self-sacrificial, and they love helping others. A less resourceful 6 becomes overprotective and restrictive. Think helicopter parents. So 6s that are like can be very helicoptery in the people they care about or worry about the most. They divide relationships into either friend or foe. So there's no nuance. So either you're safe or you're unsafe. You're a friend or you're not a friend. It's very polarized. And so they make less room for people to be a mess. They are really good at ready and aim. They struggle to say fire. They just don't want to pull the trigger on things. And so they become over-reliant on external authorities saying fire for them, or they become overly fearful of making a decision on their own. So again, they fall into that analysis paralysis as well. They can tend to be very pessimistic and cowardly is kind of one of the words that they put in there. So there's that prevailing fear. Their blind spots tend to be they smother people that are close to them. They can. They project their anxiety on those close to them, and they see the world through an us versus them lens. The projection thing is kind of interesting because 6s are very attuned to their own messiness, and so that's why they don't trust others, is because they're like, well, they're probably as messy as I am, and so I know I'm untrustworthy, so I'm definitely not going to trust them. So in essence, they project their own messiness onto the people around them. Which is interesting. Warning lights for 6s is avoidance, isolation, suspicion, procrastination, all those things that are hyper reserved. Those are warning lights for 6s that they have to be aware of. All right, 7s. I have a 7 in my family. He's 17 years old. The enthusiast, the joyful person, the adventurous. So this is what I said, 4s and 7s are similar, and you'll see kind of how that fits. So the superpower of a 7 is they bring life and vitality to all their relationships. The 7 envisions making the world a more delightful place to live in. They're curious, they're optimistic, they're creative, they're energetic, they're enthusiastic, they're entertaining. They want to help themselves and others enjoy life, to live life to the fullest. That's their thing, right? They're creative and imaginative. They have lots of ideas. They tend to be very friendly and connecting to others. Sevens are very visionary oriented, so they have long-term planning and strong intuition about their future. The core lie of the 6 is if they let themselves slow down and let themselves be true to who they are and be known for who they really are, they'll be rejected. And so in essence, they say, I am fun and full of life so that I am worthy of love and acceptance. So the 7 wants to have all the fun and be all the fun, but fun and excitement and energy is a way of avoiding feelings. It's their mechanism for avoidance. The core fear of the 7 is experiencing anxiety, any sort of painful emotion, anxiety or painful emotions. The 7 will avoid painful emotions with every fiber of their beings at all times. 7s are the most prone to addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, because it's a numbing agent. It allows them to hide and run. 7s are very prone to things like extreme sports, things like that, anything adventurous, anything that's going to create a lot of adrenaline. And it's an escape mechanism. Their core fear, like I said, experiencing anxiety and painful emotions, or the idea that their true self being revealed and slowing down long enough to actually be known and seen for who they really are. That terrifies them. The deadly sin of the 7 is gluttony, which we think of gluttony in terms of food, but really it's about the insatiable appetite for everything, and primarily pleasure and fun. So you can never have enough fun. You can never gain enough pleasure. I could never experience enough of those things inside of me. And so that's their deadly sin. They're always longing and desiring for more. 7s are never satisfied. However fun yesterday was, tomorrow needs to be more fun. So they're kind of always chasing it. Their core strategy is avoidance of feelings through escapism. They like to keep it light and on the surface. So they're relationally, they tend to be very surfacey in their relationships, but ironically, they deeply want to be known and loved for who they really are. And they long for deep relationships, but they just struggle with it. It's like they're like junior high boys at a dance. They just don't know what to do. But that's their thing. They fight off their fear of failure with optimism. So in other words, it'll be better tomorrow. I can do better tomorrow. Once I get this, once I get that, once I graduate, once I get married, once I get a job. Like there's always this perpetual, like once I get to there, everything's going to be better. And that just kind of permeates the 7. Under stress, 7s move to 1, which is the perfectionist. They can tend to, on the downside, become hypercritical of themselves, resentful that life isn't what they want it to be. 7s have a high FOMO, fear of missing out. The last thing they want to do is hear that someone else had fun and they weren't there. Like they want to be in it, they want to be in charge of it, they want to be all about the fun. Under stress, they become hypercritical of themselves and resentful that life isn't what they want it to be. But on the positive side of 1, if they go to the resourceful side, they can be more disciplined and more comfortable doing what is needed to do, not just what they want to do. 7s live by what they want to do, which means they shirk responsibility. So they struggle to just do what is necessary. Faithfulness, right? I got to go to work every day. I got to do my schoolwork. Well, I don't like this class. So a 7 doesn't like a class. He just won't do it. Whereas other numbers will go like, well, no, I can muster what I need to do what I need to. 7s struggle with that. If they don't love it, they don't want to be a part of it. And so loving it has a huge impact on whether they're engaged in it or not. Under security, they move towards 5, which is the thinker, which means, again, 5, they can become more self-disciplined on the positive side. They become more perceptive and clear and are able to channel all of that energy that they have in a positive direction. On the negative side, they withdraw and they hoard, and they begin to lean into fantasy and escapism. So 7s can get lost in video games and fantasy stuff as a way of hiding under secure conditions. Like so when things are easy, they're like, cool, I can just escape into this fantasy world. And I would say that even like things like pornography, like fantasy worlds, like that's the type of things that they're, if they move to the low side of their 5, that's what can happen. A resourceful 7 can be present and connected in the here and now. Primary thing for 7s to learn, to be in the moment, to live faithfully in the moment. They can be truthful and honest about the world and their experience in it. They become deeply invested in doing the things that matter. They can learn to trust their insights and work hard at implementing them, and they become more faithful and consistent. A less resourceful 5 is always longing for the next, the greater, the further, the better, the more. They tend to avoid being attentive to what is now, and they come off as lazy. They joke and dismiss hard things. They tend to try and stay superficial. They can become very narcissistic, irresponsible, and unreliable. And they can be very impulsive, but blind to the dangers of their impulsivity. So they act very impulsively, but almost not realize the dangers of that impulsivity. Blind spots, they have a deep desire for relationships, but that fear of being their true selves keeps them away. And then they also have that reframing thing where they're really good at taking what is a negative thing and spinning it in a positive direction to convince themselves that everything is okay when it's not. Warning lights for 7s, when you're terrified of being alone in your own head with your own thoughts, that's a high warning light. Like compulsion towards instant gratification, escapism, avoidance of meaningful conversations and relationships, or addictions, those kinds of things. All right, 2 more, we're almost there. 8s, I know an 8. So now we're in the gut triad, 8, 9s, and 1s. 8s are called the challenger, the advocate, or the leader. Superpower is strength, assertion, power, instinct. They're catalytic, they're entrepreneurial, they tend to be optimistic and visionary. They have a lot of stamina, so they can tend to persevere in hard things. At their best, 8s use their power and influence to do good, especially for the vulnerable. 8s have a deep, deep desire to help those who are hurting or marginalized. They're very self-confident, self-assured. Whether they should be or not is another question. They tend to be very clear and direct. They are not nuanced. They want to say what is on their mind at the moment, and they're going to be as clear about that as possible and not necessarily take account for how people will receive it. They're very good problem solvers, and they actually can be very good at inspiring others toward maximizing their potential. The core lie of the 8 is that their strength actually protects them from being vulnerable, and what it ends up doing is actually robs them of real relationships. And so what they use, that strength they use as a protective measure to keep vulnerability out, actually robs them. The core fear of the 8 is to be weak, or to be seen as weak, to be vulnerable, and to be truly known. If you knew me, you wouldn't love me. And so they want to be loved, but they don't think they'll be loved if they're known, so they'll just settle for being respected. So 8s will satisfy themselves with being respected when what they really want is truly to be known and loved.
What's the core line? Sorry.
What was that?
What's the succinct core line?
If you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. So it's a fight against vulnerability.
Okay.
And they use their strength and their power to protect against being vulnerable and being seen. So their core strategy is to be strong and in control in order to avoid vulnerability. They present a version of being in control and strength, but really on the inside, most 8s are scared 4-year-old little boys. They are. I can tell you from experience. But they'll present a version of themselves, and they use anger to mask the hurt, the shame, and the fear. Anger is what gets expressed with an 8, but what's going on the surface is shame, fear, all the other emotions, but they express it, the way it comes out is through anger. And not necessarily verbalized anger. It can be impatience, resentment, other forms of anger that can show themselves. Under stress, they move towards the 5 or the thinker. So in the negative sense, they can withdraw and begin to hoard emotions, right? They struggle to experience and express emotion. If they go to the high side of their 5, they start to think before they act. Remember, they're in the gut instinct. They begin to think clearly. They pursue knowledge in caring for themselves and others. So they start pulling information and being more balanced in that way. Under security, they go to 2, which is the helper, which means on the high side, they can become compassionate and caring towards others, build others up and be empathetic. On the downside, they can basically become codependent, making others need them by intimidating and manipulating so that they get that need fulfilled, right? The resourceful side of an 8 is they learn to let others speak instead of speaking for them. That's a good sign that you have a healthy 8 on your hands. They start to share vulnerably about their inner self and their life, and they are aware of and engaged emotionally in what's going on inside of them. They become trusting of others' motives. See, 8s, similar to 6s, have a kind of inherent distrust of the world around them. They begin to respect others. Actually, let me clarify that. 8s have a mistrust of any authority. 6s have a mistrust of everybody. 8s have a mistrust of anyone that they see as an authority. So the thing for 8s is that Eights don't need to be in control, but you can't control an 8. So that's the thing. They don't have to be the top of the pile, but they don't want to be controlled by anyone. So that's where their skepticism comes when it comes to authority figures, primarily. And there's this. Well, no, it isn't that they don't want you to be in charge. They don't want you to control them in your being in charge.
Or if we don't see you as something worthy of being
Correct. And so the manipulative side is they'll find all the flaws in their leaders to say, like, you suck, you're horrible, that's why I won't follow you.
So it's not they want to be in charge, they don't want you to be in charge.
They don't want you to be in charge of them. Yes, exactly. And it's very manipulative all throughout there. The resourceful side, they let others speak, so that they're trusting of motives, respectful of others, and they tend to be less rigid in their expectations when they're healthy. Eights know they're right in their own mind. They're not, but they know they're right. And you should just get on board because it's just going to be easier that way. That's kind of their disposition. Less resourceful eights use their strength and power to control people and circumstances. They can tend to be very intense, very possessive, very angry, and very impatient. And like I said, they are convinced that they are right and will do everything they can to convince you they're right too. The blind spots for eights are that they avoid weakness, especially when it comes to sympathy. They avoid affection, or they don't know how to express affection, fear or guilt because they are powerful and they need to challenge and be in control, not be controlled. Eights don't nudge people, they shove them. So eights aren't the ones in your life going, come on, we got time. Eights are the ones going like this. They're going to move you up the hill, whether you like it or not. The warning lights for eights, I think the primary, at least in my life, the primary warning light is impatience because it's subtle. But that's the form of anger that you see. Also avoidance and numbing, withdrawing, becoming very critical of others, and oftentimes eights become vengeful. And so if you set yourself against the 8, they're going to find a way to get you back. So it can be pretty sketchy. 9s, the peacemaker, also known as the harmonizer, the reconciler, or the comforter. 9s are probably, I think, one of the most fascinating and hard to understand numbers on the Enneagram. Their superpower is that they are patient, modest, they're very mellow people, very comfortable, objective. They're great at helping resolve conflict. They're good at bringing multi-sides together. They're able to empathize and speak truth to both viewpoints. We need more 9s in government. They operate and advocate well in the gray areas. 9s are very good in gray spaces. They're good at helping others feel understood and comfortable walking with people towards health. So again, if 8s will push you or shove you up the hill, 9s are very good at just kind of like, we're good. Like, we'll just take it one day at a time, one step at a time. 9s are very good at that. They're journey oriented. They enjoy the journey part of it. So like 8 with a 9 wing is going to have a much more healthy balance of that than say an 8 with a 7 wing. The core lie of a 9 is that their voice or their opinion and their desires aren't valuable or worthy. The 9s tend to, at some point, 9s started to believe that what they think, believe, and desire just doesn't matter. And so they just don't give their opinion. That doesn't matter. You're like, that's good. We'll just go with your opinions. So they're very, like, that's their core, one of their core things. They basically would say, I don't have anything proactive to offer the world and those close to me. And if I'm not a bother, if I'm easy to get along with and I don't make waves, then I'm worthy of love and respect and acceptance. So 9s go along to get along. We're good. That's fine. That's fine. It's fine. We'll be fine. They don't want to make any waves at all. The core fear is disharmony in themselves and in others and in their lives. So I think 9s struggle with things like a pandemic, right? Not that anyone doesn't struggle with it, but 9s, like anything disharmonious relationally, especially relationally, but in any way, creates a lot of anxiety and fear for them. They don't ask much of life, and so they don't want much from life, and they would ask life to kind of leave them alone. Like that's the 9's disposition. Like you do you, I'll do me, we'll be good, right? They don't rock the boat because in their mind it doesn't make a difference anyways. The deadly sin of the 9 is sloth, which is really this idea of being disconnected from any sort of passion, motivation, or direction. They're just kind of existing. And it's sad because 9s have a lot to offer the world, as they move towards health. And so what they do is they suppress their needs, they suppress their passions, they suppress their desires, and they tend to avoid engaging in anything like that. Their core strategy is, again, avoid and ignore. They tend to be very passive aggressive. And the way that their mechanism for getting along in the world is they conflate themselves with others to avoid conflict. So they're chameleons. So if a 9 is hanging out with a 4, they'll take on some of the characteristics of the 4 to identify with that 4 and they'll become more 4-like. If the 9 is hanging around with an 8, they'll be like, yeah, you're right, they are an idiot, rah, right? Like they can take on the characteristics of the 8. So they maneuver, they manipulate. In a negative way, they manipulate, but they maneuver between types of people and groups of people that they're with in order to avoid any kind of conflict. It also is what makes them good at being empathetic and being able to draw and build connections for people. Under stress, they move towards 6, which is the loyalist. They can become overwhelmed by anxiety and become very indecisive on the downside of their 6 under stress. Or if they're more the resourceful side, they become more courageous, clear, and act on their desires and preferences. So they can actually, under stress, finally say, like, no, this is what I need to do. This is what I need. Here's what's going on. So you can see some echoes between the 2 and the 9 in many ways. Under security, they move towards 3, which is the achiever. So under security, a 9 can become more practical and productive and focused and confident, which is really good. On the downside, they can begin to present false versions of themselves in order to make people think that they're being active, proactive, successful, those kinds of things. They'll start to create those false personas. Or what they do under security is they engage in a ton of busy work to look like they're achieving something, but it's really just a wasted energy. They're not really going anywhere with it.
They don't believe it matters.
That's the core lie.
There's like this sorrow undergirding.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think I have a 9 in my family. He's too young for us to actually say that for sure, but odds are, if I'm a betting man, Keegan's a 9. So under security, move to 3. So resourceful side of a 9 is they're very patient, diplomatic. They see multiple viewpoints and help others harmonize. They're easygoing. They're very meaningful at reconciliation, and this is where 9s are really helpful. They're very non-judgmental. If you've got someone that's got a really, really crazy jacked up past, you want them hanging out with a 9. Because a 9's never going to judge them. He's going to love them where they're at, and he's going to be able to kind of help guide them. That's where 9s are really, really good at that. They're impartial. They're focused, purposeful. They move in a direction. They can be prompt and not procrastinate when they're healthy. When the more healthy they are, the more they trust that inner identity, their inner authority, and can express it to those close to them. On the less resourceful side, it's funny because they're called the peacemaker, but really the less resourceful side is conflict avoidance. And oftentimes, people will be like, well, I'm a peacemaker. It's like, no, you're just avoiding conflict. And there's actually a difference because a true peacemaker can enter into conflict in order to create peace. Oftentimes, it's not peacemaking, it's avoiding conflict. So that's the less resourceful side, is they avoid it within themselves and with others. So they will avoid any conflict within themselves as well as conflict with others around them. They become overly accepting of unhealthy patterns and behaviors in both themselves and others. So an unhealthy 9 is really bad at boundaries. And so if an unhealthy 9 has a child that's doing drugs, they might become overly permissive about that kind of stuff rather than drawing a line in the sand. Or even in themselves. There's a manipulativeness to it. They struggle to know what and what they want and need, and they are very out of touch with their anger, which is ironic because anger is their primary emotion. But 9s they struggle to find and understand where their anger is. Their anger is pointed inward, and again, like the other ones, it's more of a resentment and passive aggressiveness than an outward expression. Your dad has high 9 in him. We go back and forth between 9, 1, and 6 for your dad. But yes, he has a lot of 9 in him. 9s tend to be very unaware of their needs, emotions, wants, and desires. 9s love to find shortcuts and take the path of least resistance. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Warning lights for 9s is if they're stuck and stagnant. Like I know a 9 right now who has spent the last year trying to find a job for a year. And a lot of it is like, it's cool, like we'll figure it out. Like it's so hard. 9s struggle to get the ball rolling in their life and take initiative. It's almost like an inertia thing. Nines tend to have a low self-image. They tend to lack, their warning light is that if they lack clarity and direction in life, no sense of purpose, and so they withdraw, they shut down emotionally, and they're not naturally reflective of what's going on inside of them. That's kind of the emotional stuntedness. All right, last one. Ones. The perfectionist, we save our ones for last. We love our ones. So they're known as the perfectionist. I actually don't like that title because it has a negative connotation to it in our culture. Another way to call them is the reformer or the improver. I think that's actually a better way of talking about the ones. Ones see how people in situations could be and will do everything they can to help you get there. Ones are amazing at making things better or the best they can be. They are responsible, they are dedicated, they are punctual, they are precise. They have a high moral character. If you need someone to run your budget, give it to a one. They ain't going to steal anything from you, I promise. Because they have whatever their moral framework is, like if you're talking about in the idea of Christianity, there is a right and a wrong way to do things. There is a right and a wrong moral value, and they hold to it. So you can trust them. They're precise. They pursue and call others to that same high value and purpose. Like I said, they have high character, are very pragmatic. Ones are all about practical action. How do we get it done? What does it take to get there? What's the best way to do it? That makes them really good in the business world at helping maximizing the potential of teams, seeing things for what they should be. A lot of times they can sit and go like, oh, if we just do these things, that'll make this so much better. Ones are very good at that. Ones have a high messed up meter. Like they're able to see what's messed up, like intuitively. Like they just kind of look and go, that's messed up, that's messed up, that's messed up, we can fix that, that's messed up, right? It's really, really high. Now, unfiltered, that could be overwhelming to the rest of the world around them. People are like, dude, does everything have to suck, right? Like there can be that. But ones are just very high attuned. And so what ones really desire is they seek to bring reform to the world and make things better. That's at their core of what they want. They want to make things better. They're not trying to be nitpicky, as it were. They just they see the potential in everything and they know how to get it there. The core lie of the nine is, I am lovable if I am right and do the right things and follow the rules. What ones need to learn is that they don't need to be perfect to be loved, respected, and appreciated. Like perfection is not the goal. The core fear of the lie is not getting it right. There is a right way and a wrong way, and that the world is judging me based on whether or not I do the right or the wrong thing. Because ones judge the world based on what it does, right or wrong. Ones judge themselves more than they judge anyone else. Their standard for themselves is higher than anything you could ever give them. And so their core fear is that they wouldn't do it right, get it right, and they would be judged for it. The deadly sin of the one is anger. And one's anger is a deep, smoldering anger that does not express itself outwardly often. Because anger is wrong, you can't express anger. So there's this irony inside the one, where their core emotion is anger, and yet it's the one thing above everything else the one will not express outwardly, because that's not okay. That's wrong. It's not okay to express anger. So, like I told you, your dad's high 9, high 1, high 6. He's got all three. So you could feel like the tension inside of a one. So because of that, that deep anger doesn't express itself outwardly, and oftentimes ones struggle to be aware of how angry they really are. They're far more angry than they're able to even understand or express most times. They struggle with the idea of fairness, justice. Ones are tendency towards self-martyrdom. So it's like, oh, well, I guess I'm the only one who's going to take this seriously and be responsible. Everyone else is going to take half a day off, but I'm not going to. That's a one. Well, okay, everyone else watch TV. I'll do dishes. That's fine. Internally, never outwardly. But internally, that's what's going on. I love watching your guys' faces as I say these things, by the way. It's really entertaining on my part. So they have that deep anger, and the way it mostly shows itself is in passive-aggressive resentment towards themselves. So they resent themselves often, because they know they aren't as perfect as they should be. They resent others because others don't meet the standard of what they think is right or wrong, and they can resent circumstances because at some point, a circumstance ruined the perfect opportunity. Like ones can struggle to have great vacations because they had an expectation of what it should have been, and then it wasn't that, and it crushes everything inside of them. Stop smiling. So that's kind of that where that anger sits inside the one. The core strategy of the one is, if I am perfect, then you can't criticize me. And if you can't criticize me, then you have to love me. And so being right, getting it right, being perfect. There's no, ones have an inner critic that just sits on their shoulder and tells them all the things that they should do and ought to do and aren't doing. And it's relentless. Like if you know a one, if you're married to a one, know that that voice can be exhausting to them. Because it's always there telling them what they should do, what they ought to do, what they could be doing, what could have been better. It's just there, constant narrative going on inside of them. So the core strategy is that they'll do everything perfectly. Or, ironically, ones sometimes will go into reaction formation. So what they do, so here's the thing. Ones want you to think that they love everyone and that they're everyone's friend, but they don't, and they're not. And so when ones are angry at someone, what they'll do is they'll do reaction formation and be very, very nice to that person. So they're really angry at them, but what they'll do is they'll swing it the other way and actually become really engaging with that person and really nice to them. It's this kind of reverse thing that will go on. Under stress, ones move towards 4, which is the individualist. On a positive side, or on the negative side, they can become very self-focused. There can be a prevailing sense of hopelessness. Again, these are our emotional people, right? Or a sense of unlovableness because they don't live up to their own standards. So they can become very melancholy. On the positive side of 4, they can become very creative in their energies and express that creativity both personally and then relationally. Under security, they move towards 7, which is the enthusiast. On the positive side of 7, they actually can enjoy themselves and they can put aside the inner critic and actually become very playful. Ones don't tend to like silly humor. Your ones aren't going to be huge fans of like Jim Carrey movies, or like, for the most part, they're just like, that's stupid, that's not funny. But under security, they start to kind of peel back and they can start to enjoy themselves and kind of laugh at them things that are maybe a little irreverent or not things that they normally would pursue. Under security, they move towards that. On the negative side, under security, they could begin to try and avoid negative feelings through excess. So again, overly enjoyment of things in order to avoid feelings. A resourceful one makes the world and those around them better. They see the weaknesses in people, systems, strategies, and they seek to reform them. They're fully trustworthy with their autonomy because they have such a high sense of moral value. You can trust a one to do what they said they will do. You just can. They're able to get clarity and focus in what the real problems are. Ones are very attuned to that. They can kind of get behind there might be a mess here, but they can get behind it and kind of see what's really going on. That's where ones are really good at that. And they're at ease with themselves and able to manage that inner critic better when they're healthy. A less resourceful one is going to be very self-critical. They tend to be very rigid, uptight, and very judgmental. The thing about their judgmentalism is they don't know they're being judgmental. They just come across as judgmental. It's almost like it just exists in their face. And people just, like they'll say something and people will take it as they're being judged, even though it was not intended to come across that way. That's part of that kind of natural critic that lives inside of the one. And they're actually trying to be helpful, but it comes across as judgmental. They are hypersensitive to what is wrong in them and around them, a less resourceful one especially, and that can be crushing. They have that long list of shoulds and oughts for themselves and for others, and that anger begins to show itself as resentment. Their blind spots is that they avoid and ignore their anger because they're good people and not allowed to be angry because good people don't get angry. They can tend towards OCD and nitpickiness about how things should be in whatever environment, and they struggle to let that go and allow things to be what they are. Ones are the ones that clean up after you cleaned up. Right? So you cleaned up, and then the one comes along and goes, okay, I'll do it right now. They won't say anything to you. And a healthy one will do it, and it's fine. An unhealthy one will be resentful. Like if you just done it the way I asked you to, it would be fine. Right? So that's the difference. Ones can tend to be negative Nancy's because they see through the world through such a critical lens. And so they can tend to see the negative side of things more so than the positive side. Their glass can tend to be half empty more often than half full. Their other blind spots is, oh, no. Sorry, that's the wrong note. And then they struggle to have fun. One struggle with things that don't have a clear sense of purpose. And so just going to have fun for the sake of having fun feels very foreign to a one. They're like, why? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? We're not trying to accomplish anything. Well, no, we should try and accomplish something. No, we're just trying to hang out. So just letting go and having fun is hard for ones. Like, one of my encouragements to ones is define 2 or 3 rules in your life that you have and break them once in a while. Well, I'm always on time. Okay, be 10 minutes late. Just to do it. Just to exercise muscles you've never exercised before. Well, I can't be late. What are people going to think? Yeah, they're going to be fine. You can even text them and say you're running late, but just be late. Like, it's just learning how to work against that stuff, but we don't have time to get into all that stuff. So, warning lights for ones. The primary one is that bitterness and resentment. The other thing is that their fear of not being able to do something perfectly can freeze them from trying new things. So ones struggle to engage in new things and try new things, is they're terrified of it. And what if I don't get it right? And so they just don't try. And so they miss out on a lot of things. They won't experiment, especially when it comes to being in public with other people. So they'll try something behind the scenes when no one's looking, but in a public setting, they'll struggle to engage in something new like that. Okay, we made it. We made it through all of them. That's a lot. We're done. Yeah, I have a whole other thing about how the gospel invades these things. So here's the thing. As you look through yours and as you identify yours, the reason I put things like core lies, some of these false narratives, is because the question then becomes, what's Scripture say? What's the truth? And how can you begin to find balance? Because if you're inclined towards these lies, and the Bible clearly teaches truth to those lies, how do you begin to integrate that into your life and begin to speak truth to the lies that you're believing, which are forming how you live and how you act? So that's the primary goal. So if you want to do more, if you're really curious about sitting down and going through your specific numbers, I'm happy to do that. I usually go through and we'll walk through your report that you got, get information, answer questions, and then talk about what does balance and wholeness look like. So if your core lie is that the world is a dangerous place, let's identify more of why that is and what's the truth that Scripture teaches about that. If your core lie is that you have to be perfect, well, let's talk about what the Scripture says is true about whether or not you are perfect and what does it mean to walk in freedom, because the goal is to be balanced and holistic. Cool? All right, thanks for hanging in. I know that was a half hour longer than we anticipated, but that's a lot of information.